Everyone told me to call them more often. My neighbor Ruth, a sweet woman, terrible advice. She used to say, "Zilda, just pick up the phone. They are busy, but they will answer." I tried that for 2 years. I really did. You want to know what happens when you keep calling people who are too busy to call you back? You start to feel like a bill they forgot to pay, something sitting on the counter that makes them feel guilty every time they walk past it. I did not want to be a bill. I had spent 91 years being something real. I was not willing to spend whatever time I had left being a reminder of someone else's inadequacy. So I stopped calling. Not out of spite. I want to make that very clear. I know spite. I have tasted it, felt it in my mouth, and learned to spit it out before it poisoned me. This was not spite. It was something quieter. And to be honest, something I should have figured out 30 years earlier. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the beginning. Or at least to the beginning of this particular chapter, because at 91 you no longer have beginnings, you have chapters. Some of them you would rather not reread. It was a Wednesday. I remember because I had made soup. Not from a can, not from one of those little powder packets my daughter-in-law likes to give me as if I had forgotten how to cook. Real soup. Chicken, vegetables, and that broth that takes all morning to get right. I had been on my feet for 3 hours. My knees were complaining. My back was making its usual comments, but the soup was perfect, and I thought, I will call Daniel. Daniel is my youngest. He lives 40 minutes away. I will call him and say, "Come for lunch. I made soup." Because that is what I used to do. It is what mothers do. You make something good and you want to share it. He did not answer. I left a message. I said the soup was ready if he wanted to come by. I said it casually. I know how to sound casual. I have decades of practice. I did not say I had not seen him in 6 weeks. I did not say that his father had been gone for 4 years, and that some days I did not speak to a single living person. I just said, "Soup. Come if you want." He sent a text 3 hours later. "Sorry, Mom. Crazy week. Next time. Next time." I stared at that message for a long while. The way you look at something that should mean something but has gone flat, like bread left out too long. And then I turned off my phone, sat down at the kitchen table, and ate my soup alone. It was still good. I made sure to notice that. That was the day something shifted in me. I did not cry. I had cried plenty in the months before, quietly in the bathroom, where no one could hear, because there was no one to hear. I had cried for George, my husband, who left me 4 years ago on a gray November morning so ordinary, it seemed impossible that such an ordinary morning could contain something so enormous. I had cried for the life we had built together. 58 years, 2 months, and 11 days. Not that I was counting, though of course I was always counting. I had cried because I did not know how to be a person in a house that used to hold 2 people. I had cried because I was lonely in a way I did not have the vocabulary for. But that Wednesday, with the soup and the text message, I did not cry. I was done with that particular kind of grief. I had moved into something harder and strangely more useful. If you are watching this and you have an elderly parent at home, drop a comment below. Tell me, when did you last call them just to talk? Not to check in, just to talk. Write it down there. I want to know. I want to be honest with you about what I mean when I say my children ignored me. Because ignore is a complicated word, and I think it does a disservice to the whole messy truth of it. My children did not ignore me the way you would ignore a stranger. They ignored me the way people ignore things that are not urgent. The way you ignore a step that is creaking but not quite broken yet, or a bill that is not due until next month. I was background noise. Loved background noise. They would have been devastated if something had happened to me. I know that. Daniel would have fallen apart. My daughter Sandra, she lives farther away, in another state, a fact that has always felt more like a choice than a distance. Sandra would have gotten on the first plane and wept at my bedside in a way that would have been entirely genuine and entirely too late. That is the thing nobody tells you about being old and being loved by your children. The love is real. It is just inconveniently timed. It shows up at funerals and hospitals and Thanksgiving. The rest of the year, you are on your own. And for a while, I am ashamed to admit this, but I said I was going to be honest. For a while, I tried to make myself smaller to fit into the corners of their lives. I stopped mentioning that I was having trouble with the steps to the front door. I stopped telling Daniel that the upstairs bathroom faucet had been dripping for 3 months because I did not want to be the problem again. I stopped asking Sandra to visit because she always said yes with such enthusiasm and then rescheduled with such apology that the whole cycle left me feeling worse than if I had never asked at all. I became very good at saying I am fine in the exact tone that required no follow-up. Women of my generation are exceptional at that. It is one of our least useful gifts. But there is a cost to all that shrinking. Nobody talks about it, but I will. When you make yourself small enough to avoid being a burden, you eventually disappear. Not to them. You are still there. Still their mother. Still the person they will call crying at 2 a.m. when their marriage hits a rough patch or their child says something cruel. But you disappear to yourself. You start to feel like a role. The mother, the widow, the old woman on Maple Street who used to be someone and is now a collection of needs waiting to happen. I was not going to disappear. Not at 91. Not after everything I had survived. George used to say, and he had a way of saying things that sounded simple and turned out to be enormous. He used to say, "Zilda, the only thing worse than being lonely is being lonely with people watching." I thought about that a lot after he died, because I was surrounded by love. Cards from Sandra at Christmas, calls from Daniel on my birthday, my grandchildren who sent me photographs on their phones of things they thought I would find funny. And I had never felt so completely, so profoundly alone. Loved and alone. You do not expect those two things to live in the same house, but they do. They are surprisingly compatible roommates. So, Wednesday, soup. Next time. I decided to stop waiting for next time. The first thing I did was put the phone in the kitchen drawer. Not permanently. I am old, not reckless. But I decided I was going to stop organizing my days around whether someone had called or texted or remembered I existed. I was going to stop checking, stop hoping, stop the particular quiet devastation of a phone that does not ring. That was harder than I expected. I had had the phone for years, and I had not realized until I put it away how much of my daily emotional life had organized itself around its silence. Every hour without a call had become its own small rejection. Every evening without a message had become confirmation of something I did not want to confirm. The phone had become an instrument for measuring my own unwantedness, and I had been checking it constantly, like a woman taking her own temperature to prove she was sick. I was done taking my temperature. The second thing I did, and this is going to sound strange, so stay with me. The second thing I did was I started keeping a record, not a diary. I tried diaries when I was young and found them far too honest for my comfort. This was different. I got a small notebook, yellow cover, spiral bound, that I had kept in the kitchen drawer for years. And every day I wrote down one thing, one specific thing I had done that day. Not felt. Done. Made soup. Watered the plant on the windowsill, the African violet that George bought me 11 years ago, and that has somehow outlived every prediction of its death. Read 6 chapters of a novel about a woman in Scotland who discovers her grandmother was someone entirely different from who she had always believed her to be. Sat in the backyard for an hour and watched a bird I could not name build something in the oak tree with a persistence I found genuinely moving. Small things, but they were mine. They were the evidence that I was still a person who did things, not just a person things happened to. If you enjoy stories like this one, follow this channel. Every week there is a new story here, real and honest, just like this one. The third thing I did, and this is where the story really begins, so pay attention. The third thing I did was I went for a walk. Now, this requires some context. I live on a street that I have lived on for 31 years. George and I moved here when our children were mostly grown, when we finally had a house that was too big for us instead of too small, which felt like an achievement worth celebrating. The neighbors have changed over the years. The Hendersons moved away. The people after them I never really knew. And then, for about 2 years, the house next door to mine sat empty in a way that felt somehow reproachful, like a person standing with their arms crossed. And then, about 8 months ago, a young woman moved in. I knew very little about her. She was young, though at my age everyone is young, so let me be more specific. She was perhaps in her early 30s, which to me looks like someone who has barely started. Her name, I learned from the mailbox, was Claire. I thought it was a clean, simple name. I liked that about it. She had a little girl, 4 years old, maybe 5, with the kind of energy that expresses itself primarily through sound. I could hear her sometimes through the wall between our yards, narrating whatever she was doing with the complete conviction of someone who believes every activity deserves a documentary. Her name was Lena. I had waved at Claire a few times. She had waved back with the particular exhaustion of someone waving from underwater. She was always carrying something, a bag, a child, a box, and the specific expression of a person who is managing too many things alone. I recognized that expression. I had worn it for years when my children were young and George was working long hours, and the house was full of small crises requiring immediate resolution. I knew what it looked like to be that tired. I knew what it looked like to be a woman holding everything together with both hands while everyone around you assumes it is holding itself. On the day I went for my walk, a Thursday, warm enough that the smell of someone's late-season roses was still in the air, I walked past Claire's house and saw her on the front steps. She was sitting with her elbows on her knees, looking at nothing. Lena was inside. The house behind her was quiet, and she just looked done, like a person who has finally put down everything they were carrying and is sitting with the strange, exhausted emptiness of empty hands. I should have kept walking. The polite thing, the thing a properly boundaried woman would do, was to keep walking and let her have her moment. I sat down next to her on the steps. She looked at me, startled, because I had moved quietly and because I do not think she had expected the 90-pound elderly woman from next door to sit down beside her uninvited. I said, "You look like someone who could use 5 minutes of not being asked anything." She stared at me, and then she said, "That is the most accurate thing anyone has said to me in months." We sat together for a while without talking. The roses smelled good. The light was going golden the way it does in September, the way it makes everything look briefly and specifically worth saving. And then she started talking, not about anything important at first, just the ordinary unhappiness of a life that was more than she had expected. She had moved here after a divorce. The divorce was not dramatic, and that was almost the hardest part. She said it was just two people who had stopped knowing how to be kind to each other. Her family was far away. Lena's father was present in the technical sense. He took her every other weekend, but the absence between weekends was enormous, and Claire filled it with work and worry in roughly equal measure. She was tired in the specific way that does not get better with sleep. And she had been tired for so long she had started to think this was just who she was now. I listened. I am good at listening. I have been good at it since long before it was fashionable to call it a skill. Women of my generation listened the way we breathed, automatically, necessarily, without expecting anyone to notice. When she finished, she looked at me like she had done something embarrassing. "I am sorry," she said. "I do not know why I said all of that." "Because I sat down," I said, "and I did not ask you anything." She laughed. It was a surprised laugh, the kind that happens before you decide whether something is funny. I liked her immediately, in the way I like people who laugh before they think about whether they should. Lena came to the door 3 minutes later and stared at me with the unself-conscious intensity that only small children and very old people can get away with. She said, "Are you old?" And Claire said, "Lena." But I said yes, extremely. And Lena nodded, satisfied, as though I had passed a test. Within 2 weeks, Lena was coming to my house after school. Not because anyone planned it, not because Claire and I sat down and made an arrangement with rules and schedules. It happened the way things happen when two people are both missing something and find that each other's missing thing is a different shape than their own. Claire needed someone to be present with Lena for 1 hour in the afternoon, and I needed someone to be present with me for any amount of time at all. Lena was an astonishing child. I use that word deliberately, and I am not the type to astonish easily. She was curious in the specific, relentless way of children who have been talked to as though their questions matter. She asked me once why my hands looked different from her mother's, and I told her about what hands look like when they have been used for 90 years. She held my hand and examined it with the seriousness of a small physician, turning it over, tracing the raised veins, and then she said, "It is like a map." I nearly fell out of my chair. We baked. She had never made actual cookies, which I found astonishing. Not the judgment kind of astonishing, just the observational kind. We made oatmeal cookies with raisins, and Lena ate 4 before they were fully cool and denied eating any, which I found hilarious and oddly endearing. We read books. She was learning to read, and she would sound out words with a concentration so fierce her little forehead wrinkled. And when she got a word right, she would look up at me for confirmation, and I gave it every time, because there is no small victory that does not deserve to be acknowledged. I taught her how to water the African violet. I explained that plants do not need much. They need light and water and to be left alone the rest of the time. She found this deeply philosophical. "Like people," she said. I thought about it. "Some people," I said, "the ones worth knowing. If this story is touching your heart, leave a comment below. Tell me about someone in your life who taught you something important when you were not expecting it." I read every single one. Claire started coming too, after a while. She would knock on the door after work, that exhausted ocean swimmer knock, and I would say, "Come in." And we would sit in the kitchen while Lena watched something on a small tablet in the living room. Claire would drink tea and tell me about her day, and I would tell her about mine. Not the lonely parts, not at first, but eventually those too. I told her about George, about how the house still had the shape of him, his chair, his side of the closet that I had never completely reorganized, the coffee mug he always used that I still washed and put away even though I would never use it myself. She did not say anything predictable about grief. She did not tell me time heals, or that he was in a better place, or any of the other well-meaning, worthless things people say. She just said, "It sounds like you really saw each other." And I had to stop for a moment, because, yes, that was exactly it. We had seen each other. And being unseen after 58 years of being seen is its own particular kind of blindness. I told her about Daniel and Sandra, not with bitterness. I had let most of the bitterness dissolve by then, the way you let a hard candy dissolve in your mouth rather than biting down on it. But I told her the truth, that my children loved me and had forgotten how to include me, that I had spent months waiting by a phone I had finally put in a drawer, that I had felt, for a humiliating stretch of time, like the kind of problem people deal with rather than the kind of person people want. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think people always mean to do better. They just do not feel the urgency until it is too late." "I know," I said. "That is what I am trying not to need from them, the urgency." The thing I want to tell you, the thing that took me 91 years to learn, which is embarrassing, but also exactly how long it needed to take, is this. The loneliness does not go away when your children call more often. It does not go away when you move closer to family, or when you find a good routine, or when you finally get the faucet fixed. The loneliness that comes with this stage of life is structural. It is built into the architecture of being old in a world organized for the young. You cannot fix it with phone calls. What you can do, what I did slowly, without even fully recognizing I was doing it, is fill your days with things that are genuinely, specifically yours, not things that pass time, things that use you, things that ask something of you, and then reward you for the effort. Lena asks something of me every afternoon. She asks me for attention, for patience, for oatmeal cookies, for explanations of things I had long since stopped thinking were interesting enough to explain. She asks me why old photographs are gray. She asks me if I have ever met anyone who became president. She asked me once, with complete seriousness, whether I was afraid to die. And I said, "Some days." And she nodded and said, "Me too sometimes." And I thought, this child is 4 years old, and she already understands that the honest answer is more comfortable than the reassuring one. I was charmed, absolutely. Claire asked something of me too, though she was more careful about it, the way adults are careful, trying not to ask too much, trying to be appropriate, trying not to need things from a 91-year-old woman who has presumably earned the right not to be needed. But I was not looking to be free of need. I was looking to be useful. There is a difference, and it matters more than I can explain. She started asking me things. How I made bread, because she had never made it and wanted to. Whether she was being too soft or too hard on Lena about a particular habit she was trying to change. She was asking for the opinion of a woman who had raised 2 children, not an app or a podcast or a parenting philosophy she had read in an article. Whether it was normal, after a divorce, to still love someone you could not be with and miss them for the person they were before they became someone you could not stay with. I told her yes. I told her grief does not follow the rules of who you are supposed to grieve. I told her about a friendship I had in my 30s with a woman named Marvella, tall woman, extraordinary laugh. She could make the whole room turn toward her the way a plant turns toward light. And how Marvella and I had a falling out over something I can barely remember now, some argument about something that seemed enormous at the time and is dust now, and how I missed her for 20 years, not constantly. She would appear in the smell of a particular perfume, in a laugh from a stranger across a restaurant, in the specific grief of a friendship that had no funeral. I told Claire, grief does not need permission. It does not need to be appropriate. You are allowed to miss people who are still alive. You are allowed to mourn the version of your life you had expected. She cried, not dramatically. She was not a dramatic person, which I appreciated. She cried quietly, with her hands around her mug, and I did not hand her a tissue or tell her it would be okay. I just sat there with her the way she had sat with me on the steps and let the crying be what it was. This is what I learned at 91 after a Wednesday of soup and silence and a text message that said next time. You cannot make your children see you. You can be deeply loved and completely invisible at the same time, and no amount of calling or asking or quietly waiting will change that. But you can make yourself so alive, so genuinely present in your own days, that the invisibility stops being the most important thing in the room. You can find the people who need what you have, not because they owe you anything, not because it fills the exact shape of the hole your children leave, but because being useful, really useful, in the small, daily, domestic human way, is one of the few things that makes the hours feel like more than waiting. My hands shake now. I notice it when I water the African violet, when I fold the laundry, when I hold a pen. They used to be steady hands. They held 2 babies, kneaded 40 years of bread, wiped more tears than I could count, mine and other people's, because women are always wiping other people's tears and hoping someone notices. They still work. They still know what they are doing. They just shake a little while they do it. Daniel called me 3 weeks after the soup Wednesday. He did not know anything had changed. He called on a Sunday afternoon, chatty and cheerful, asking how I was. I said I was wonderful. I said I was teaching my neighbor's daughter how to bake. I said I had been reading a novel about Scotland. I said the African violet was doing particularly well this year. He said, "Wow, Mom, you sound really good." And I said, "I am really good." And I meant it. He came for lunch the following weekend. Not because I had asked, not because he felt guilty, because something in my voice had shifted. I heard it too afterwards. A voice that had been waiting to be visited had become a voice that was simply, matter-of-factly, living. And a living person is more interesting to visit than a waiting one. I have noticed that about people. We are drawn to the ones who seem not to need us, not because we are cruel, but because their fullness makes us feel we are adding to something rather than filling a hole. He brought his youngest, my granddaughter Olivia, who is 7 and has her grandfather's stubbornness and her mother's smile, a combination that will serve her well in life and poorly in arguments. Olivia and Lena met in the backyard, and within 10 minutes were negotiating the terms of some game I could not follow, which appeared to involve a stick, a specific boundary in the grass, and very serious consequences for crossing it. I watched them from the kitchen window while Daniel sat at my table and drank the coffee I had made and told me about his week. And for the first time in a long time, I was only half listening, because I was watching 2 small people make a world out of a backyard, and I was thinking, I did that once. I built worlds out of small things. I know how it is done. Sandra called the following month. She had heard from Daniel that I was doing well. She sounded, and I do not want to be uncharitable because she loves me and I know that, she sounded slightly surprised, as though my doing well was a development that required investigation. She asked questions. She asked about Claire, about Lena, about the baking, about the novel, and then she was quiet for a moment and she said, "Mom, I have been worried about you." And I said, "I know." And she said, "I should call more." And I said, "You should do whatever you have time for. I am fine." And I think she heard in that, "I am fine," not, "I am fine because you called," but "I am fine regardless of whether you call." I think she heard something that made her both relieved and just slightly unnerved, which was exactly the right response. She visited the next month. She stayed for 4 days, which was 2 days longer than she had stayed in the last 2 years combined. She slept in the guest room and made her bed every morning, which she got from me. And she sat with me in the evenings, and we talked about things we had not talked about in years. Her marriage, which was going through a quiet, difficult stretch. Her work, which she loved, but that had started to cost her something she could not quite name. Her children, who were growing into people she found both astonishing and slightly terrifying. I did not tell her it would be okay. She did not need me to. She needed someone to sit with her in the not okayness of it, the specific grown woman difficulty of a life that is full and hard and hers. I could do that. I have been sitting with not okayness for 91 years. I have become, if nothing else, extraordinarily patient with difficulty. On her last evening, after Claire and Lena had come for dinner, Lena had asked if Sandra was a grandmother too, and Sandra had laughed the surprise laugh that meant she was delighted. After they had gone home and the dishes were done and the house was quiet in the good way, the full quiet rather than the empty quiet, Sandra sat across from me in George's chair. She has my mother's eyes and George's jaw and something completely her own in the way she holds herself. A specific self-possession I always admired, even when it frustrated me. She was beautiful and tired and real, and mine, in the way children are yours, even when they have been other people's for decades. She said, "I did not realize how much I was missing." I looked at her for a long time, and then I said, "You were not missing anything. I was not going anywhere." She understood what I meant. I was not nowhere. I just was not where she thought to look. I was here. I am here. Or I will be here until I am not. And I intend to be entirely, specifically, usefully here until that time comes. Follow this channel if you want to keep hearing stories like this one. There is a new one every week, and each of them is worth your time. I am 91 years old. I have buried my husband, my parents, 2 of my closest friends, and a version of myself I had to let go of in order to survive what came after. I have made soup no one came to eat. I have waited by phones in kitchen drawers. I have felt the specific cold of being loved and forgotten at the same time. And I have learned, late, but not too late, never too late, that a woman who is still building something is impossible to overlook for long. Not because she demands to be seen, but because she is genuinely too busy to notice whether she is. Build something. Anything. Something that needs you tomorrow. And then, if they come, your children, your grandchildren, the people you love who have gotten too busy to remember that busy is a choice. If they come, you will have something real to show them. Not your loneliness, not your need. Something you made with your shaking hands. That is all I have. I do not know if it is wisdom. It is just what happened to me. Before you go, leave a comment telling me something real. Tell me about someone you need to call, or someone who called you at the right moment. I will be reading every single word.